Have you ever stood in a room full of people, smiling, laughing, living, yet felt invisible? Felt like your presence was no longer a gift, but a ghost? When someone stops seeing your worth, you don't shrink. Oh no, child, you rise. We are born into a world where love is currency, and approval is the bank we're taught to deposit ourselves into. From the very first cry, we're measured. How we look, how we behave, how well we fit into the molds crafted by others. The quiet tragedy is that somewhere along the way, we begin to believe that our worth is not something we are born with, but something we earn, beg for, or barter with. That if someone sees us, truly sees us, then we matter. And if they don't, then somehow we're less, diminished, unworthy. It starts early. A parent withdraws affection. A friend chooses someone else. A lover grows cold. And like a flower leaning toward a fading sun, we stretch ourselves toward their warmth, believing that if we do just a little more, if we become just a little different, they will come back. They will see us again. They will remember that we are enough. But here's the painful truth we avoid looking at directly. When someone stops valuing you, it often has less to do with your worth and more to do with their blindness. It's like placing a diamond in front of someone who only sees rocks. Their inability to recognize value doesn't erase it. The diamond doesn't become less precious because someone mistook it for gravel. Still, we internalize their neglect. We carry it like a mirror, reflecting every ignored call, every skipped invitation, every fading compliment back at ourselves. And in doing so, we rewrite our own story. Maybe I'm not lovable. Maybe I'm too much. Maybe I'm not enough. These lies become the soundtrack of our self-worth, whispering at us every time we look in the mirror. The problem is we start to build our identity out of borrowed bricks. We gather the opinions of others and stack them high, hoping they'll form a home where we can finally feel safe. But that kind of shelter is unstable. It sways with every gust of rejection and collapses when someone leaves. And when it falls, we're left with nothing but the rubble of who we tried to be. We hand out pieces of ourselves like candy, hoping someone will love us enough to make us whole. We change our voice to be softer, our needs to be smaller, our dreams to be quieter, just to fit inside someone else's comfort zone. And when they still walk away, we blame ourselves for being too loud, too needy, too ambitious, too human. But let me tell you something you may have forgotten. Your worth is not a transaction. It is not a vote. It is not determined by how someone else sees you, treats you, or fails to hold on to you. You are whole not because someone says so, but because you exist. You breathe, you dream, you love deeply. That alone makes you worthy. When we tie our value to another's gaze, we hand them a power they were never meant to hold. We let them become the judge, the jury, and sometimes the executioner of our self-esteem. We forget that their vision is flawed, clouded by their own wounds, fears, and limitations. Expecting someone to recognize your light when they haven't even faced their own darkness is like asking the blind to describe a sunrise. They can't see it, not because it isn't beautiful, but because they don't have the eyes to see. And so we must unlearn this illusion. We must peel back every layer of self-doubt and realize that no one can validate a soul they don't understand. You don't become valuable because someone chooses you. You are valuable even if they don't. You don't become beautiful because someone says you are. You were beautiful before they even knew your name. There is a quiet power in knowing this, in standing tall even when the applause fades, in smiling with your whole chest, not because someone is watching, but because joy is your birthright. When you no longer need someone else's love to prove your worth, you walk differently. You stop shrinking to fit their world and start expanding into your own. And in that moment, when you reclaim your value from the hands that dropped it, something shifts. You stop trying to convince people to stay. You stop explaining your heart to those who've already made up their mind. You realize that the love you were seeking from them was always supposed to come from you. So next time someone makes you feel small, don't argue. Don't fight for your seat at a table that doesn't appreciate your presence. Instead, rise. Rise and take all that love you were pouring into them and pour it into yourself. Because your worth was never theirs to give. It was yours to remember. When someone starts pulling away from us, emotionally, physically, spiritually, we don't always recognize it for what it is. We don't always pause and ask, why am I not being valued? Instead, we begin a slow, almost unconscious performance. We hustle, we strive, we give more, love harder, speak softer, and begin to bend ourselves into shapes we were never meant to hold. And before we know it, we're no longer loving from wholeness, we're loving from fear. It's a deeply human instinct. The moment we sense someone slipping through our fingers, we tighten our grip. We think, maybe if I show them how much I care, they'll come back. Maybe if I'm more patient, more accommodating, more forgiving of the ways they're ignoring my needs, they'll remember the reasons they once chose me. So we begin to overcompensate. We text first, every time. We plan the dates, initiate the conversations, offer reassurance, give them space, chase after that space, offer to fix what they never asked us to fix. We mold ourselves to fit the cracks they created in the relationship, believing that our love can patch what is breaking. But here's the thing. When we overcompensate, we are not loving from a place of truth. We are negotiating. We are trying to buy someone's affection with our own self-worth as currency. And that never leads to intimacy. It only leads to exhaustion. Because no matter how much you give, you cannot make someone value you who has already decided to stop trying. It's a dangerous cycle too, because every time we overextend ourselves, we get further away from our own emotional center. We silence our needs because we fear they'll be too much. We tolerate neglect because we convince ourselves it's better than loneliness. We start to believe that love has to be earned, has to be proven, has to be performed, that just being who we are is not enough. Overcompensation is not a sign of love. It is a symptom of fear, fear of abandonment, fear of rejection, fear of being alone with ourselves. And instead of honoring that fear by facing it, we feed it. We feed it with more effort, more apologies, more silence, more compromise. And each time we do, we lose a little more of ourselves. And let's speak plainly, the more we do for someone who has stopped doing for us, the more we teach them that our boundaries are flexible, our love is unconditional, even when it is not reciprocated, and our self-respect can be negotiated. We train them to expect more from us than they are willing to give, and in the end, we don't feel more loved. We feel more invisible, because it doesn't matter how brightly you burn for someone who refuses to open their eyes. There's a deep sadness in trying to hold together something that was never meant to fall apart, but overcompensating won't stop the unraveling. It will only delay the inevitable, and in the meantime, it will drain you. You'll find yourself resenting the very person you're trying to please. You'll feel the weight of performing for someone who no longer applauds. And the worst part is, you'll begin to question your own worth, not because it diminished, but because you buried it beneath someone else's comfort. People who truly care for you will meet you in the middle. They won't watch you carry the entire emotional load and call it love. They won't let you beg for affection and call it compromise. If they stop showing up, if they stop giving, and you feel compelled to do twice as much just to maintain the connection, step back. That's not balance. That's survival. And love should not feel like survival. At some point, we have to ask ourselves, what am I afraid will happen if I stop overgiving? That they'll leave, that we'll be alone, that we'll finally have to confront the aching truth that we are trying to hold on to someone who has already let go? Let them go, and then sit with yourself. Not to blame, not to mourn the effort wasted, but to remember who you were before you believed that love had to be earned by losing yourself. Because real love is not measured by how much you can endure. It is not a test of patience or a race to prove your worth. Real love says, I see you, I hear you, I value you, without needing you to exhaust yourself to be seen. You do not need to keep giving just to be chosen. The right people will choose you because of your peace, not at the cost of it. And the moment you stop overcompensating for someone else's absence, you make room for your own presence to feel like enough again. And it always was. There is a quiet kind of power that often goes unnoticed. It doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't slam doors. It doesn't leave with dramatic goodbyes or grand ultimatums. It simply pulls back. It recedes like the tide, subtle but undeniable. And when it's gone, you realize what it was holding up. That is the power of withdrawing your energy without fanfare, without announcement. When someone no longer values your presence, your time, your heart, you don't always need to fight for clarity. You don't need to keep explaining yourself to someone who stopped listening. And you certainly don't need to keep giving to someone who no longer sees the weight of what you offer. The simple trick isn't in confrontation. It isn't in begging for change. It's in pulling away with silence and letting that silence speak. You see, energy is more than effort. It's your time, your attention, your care, your presence, your spirit. When you love someone, whether it's a friend, a partner, a family member, you give that energy freely, hoping it's honored. But sometimes people grow so used to your giving that they mistake it for something owed. They forget the difference between kindness and obligation. And so when you keep showing up despite being overlooked, they start assuming you always will. That's when the trick becomes necessary. You don't lash out. You don't explain every wound or plead for reciprocity. You simply stop feeding the connection. You stop initiating, stop overextending, stop placing yourself where you're no longer met with care. Not in bitterness, but in clarity. You begin to understand that loving someone does not mean you must abandon yourself for them. When you withdraw your energy without announcement, the absence becomes louder than any words you could have said. People feel it in the shift, the missed good morning messages, the silence where your laughter used to be, the space you used to fill with warmth, now left quiet. It is in that silence that the true value of your presence is either realized or confirmed as forgotten. And that is the beauty of the act. It isn't revenge, it isn't manipulation, it's truth. It reveals the nature of the connection. Some will notice your absence and reach for you, realizing they had taken something rare for granted. Others will not. They will carry on unaffected, and in doing so, they reveal everything you need to know. There is a kind of grace in stepping away without causing harm, without bitterness in your chest. It allows you to maintain your dignity. It lets you reclaim your energy for yourself, to redirect it toward the people, places, and things that nourish your soul instead of draining it. And it frees you from the exhausting cycle of trying to prove your worth to someone who has already decided not to see it. But here's where the depth lies. Withdrawing your energy also means confronting the part of you that wants to be chosen, the part that aches to be seen and held, the part that fears that if you stop trying, no one else will try either. That's why this isn't easy. It's simple, yes, but not easy, because it demands that you trust in your own enoughness, that you believe your value is not determined by how hard you fight for someone who stopped fighting for you. You might feel guilt at first, you might feel selfish, but what's truly selfish is asking someone to keep pouring themselves out while you offer only sips in return. What's truly unkind is taking and taking without pausing to give. So don't let guilt tether you to depletion. Don't let hope trick you into staying where your soul is shrinking. Hope is beautiful, but when misplaced, it becomes a weight around your spirit. And as you pull back, something remarkable begins to happen. You hear yourself again. You notice your own needs, the dreams you quieted to keep someone else comfortable, the truth you buried under compromise. Your energy begins to heal when it's no longer being handed to the ungrateful. You realize you can be whole without their validation. You can be joyful without their presence. You can be free without their permission. Sometimes the loudest answer is no answer at all. Sometimes the most profound act of love for yourself is to leave gently, not with anger, but with certainty. You don't need to announce your departure from a place that no longer values you. You just need to leave, softly, quietly, fully. And in the space that your energy once filled, you'll find yourself again, not smaller for walking away, but larger, clearer, and more alive. Stillness is not the absence of motion. It is the presence of awareness. In a world that constantly urges us to react, to speak, to fix, to chase, choosing stillness is a radical act. It is a reclaiming of power, a refusal to be tossed and turned by the emotional tides stirred up by someone else's inconsistency. Stillness doesn't mean you no longer care. It means you've stopped allowing your care to cost you your peace. When someone begins to devalue you, the natural impulse is to do something, say something, prove something, fight for something. That urgency is born from a place of fear, of hurt, of confusion. You want to know why they changed, why they're distant, why you're no longer a priority. You want answers, resolution, clarity. But what you must understand is that not every question deserves your energy. And not every answer will bring healing. Sometimes clarity comes not from action, but from observation, not from noise, but from silence. Stillness is where that clarity lives. Stillness is what happens when you stop trying to convince someone to love you and start listening to what their absence has been trying to say. It's what happens when you no longer beg for the bare minimum and realize how much you've been overreaching. It's the quiet strength of sitting with the ache without immediately trying to numb it. It's the discipline of not reacting, not chasing, not falling into the loop of over-explaining or over-giving. It is choosing to sit still, breathe deep, and listen, not to them, but to you. And from that stillness, detachment is born. But let us not confuse detachment with indifference. Detachment is not about closing your heart or pretending you don't care. It is not apathy. True detachment is a sacred form of self-respect. It means you can still love someone, still wish them well, still carry memories with grace, but no longer tie your emotional well-being to their behavior. Detachment is choosing to love yourself more than you need them to act right. It's saying, I care, but I will not crumble. I love, but I will not chase. There's an immense strength in that choice. Detachment is like standing on the shore and watching a ship sail away. You don't scream at it to return. You don't dive into the sea to follow it. You simply stand still with your feet rooted in your own worth, and you let it go. If it comes back, it does so because it chooses to. And if it doesn't, you realize it was never meant to dock in the harbor of your heart for long. You do not anchor yourself to someone who has already set sail. Stillness allows you to reclaim your center. When you stop reacting to every slight, every delay, every cold shoulder, you begin to realize how much of your energy was being spent on survival rather than on self. Detachment doesn't mean you shut down. It means you stop being pulled in 100 directions by someone who doesn't know what they want. You stop dancing to the rhythm of their indecision. You begin to write your own rhythm, slower, stronger, more deliberate. When you detach, you create space. And in that space, you begin to hear your own voice again. Not the voice that pleads, not the voice that begs, not the voice that fears, but the voice that knows, the voice that says, I am still worthy, I am still whole, I am still enough. And this voice has been there all along, muffled by noise, by chaos, by the ache of trying too hard. Stillness brings it back into focus. We often believe that strength is found in persistence, in staying, in holding on, in fighting for someone who has given up the fight. But true strength sometimes looks like quiet detachment. It looks like choosing yourself without the need for drama. It looks like no longer asking why someone changed and instead asking why you stayed so long after they did. There is healing in detachment. There is power in stillness. These are not passive states. They are brave decisions. It takes courage to stop reaching. It takes clarity to let someone go without making a spectacle of it. And it takes deep, unwavering love for yourself to know when to stop giving. So be still, not because you're weak, but because you're wise. Detach, not because you don't feel, but because you finally understand that your peace is too precious to be placed in the hands of someone who doesn't know how to hold it. Be still and watch what happens when you no longer feed the fire that's been burning you. You may just discover the quietest freedom you've ever known. There comes a moment when the mirror you've been using no longer reflects your true image, not because you have changed beyond recognition, but because the mirror, shaped by someone else's opinions, neglect, or dismissiveness, was never designed to reflect your wholeness. Instead, it only captured fragments, distortions, conditions. You begin to see yourself through the lens of who they made you feel like rather than who you truly are. That is the moment you must stop, breathe, and reclaim what was never meant to be surrendered, your inner value and your sacred space. Inner value is not something another person gives you with their attention, approval, or love. It is not awarded when someone chooses you, stays with you, or praises you. And yet, we often hand over the key to our worth without even realizing it. We trade our self-assurance for crumbs of recognition. We shrink ourselves to fit inside relationships that cannot hold our full spirit. We learn to accept emotional scarcity and call it compromise. And slowly, almost silently, we lose touch with the truth of our own light. But value, real value, is not external. It does not fluctuate with someone else's presence. It does not rise and fall with how often they call, how kindly they speak, or how much they claim to care. Inner value is not conditional because it is not constructed, it is discovered. It has always lived within you under layers of doubt, fear, and misdirection. Reclaiming it means turning inward and finally asking yourself, what have I forgotten about me? It is an uncomfortable process at first. You will be tempted to seek validation from the outside. You will want to call, to explain, to be understood. But reclaiming your inner value means learning that your worth does not require confirmation. It is choosing silence, not because you don't have something to say, but because you no longer need someone else to hear it to make it true. It's the brave act of witnessing your own pain and not begging someone else to soothe it. It's returning home to yourself after being exiled by the expectations of others. Reclaiming your space goes hand in hand with this journey. Space is not just physical, it's emotional, mental, spiritual. When you've spent too long making room for someone who did not know how to honor that space, you begin to live in the shadows of your own life. You decorate your days around their moods, walk on the eggshells of their silence, adjust your dreams to fit the size of their limitations. Your inner world becomes smaller, dimmer, quieter. You begin to feel like a guest in your own being. Taking that space back is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of survival. It means recognizing that the space you give someone is sacred. It is your time, your energy, your vulnerability. If someone cannot care for it, they do not deserve to occupy it. You don't need to be angry to set boundaries. You don't need to explain the absence you create when you remove yourself from what no longer aligns with your peace. You simply need to know that you are worthy of a life that reflects your truth, not just someone else's comfort. Reclaiming your inner value and space often feels lonely at first. That's the part nobody warns you about. You'll miss the noise, even the pain, because at least you were connected. But connection built on the erosion of your self-worth is not connection. It is bondage. And the loneliness that comes with healing is far more gentle than the loneliness of being unseen while standing beside someone. So you begin slowly. You build new rituals of self-affirmation. You speak to yourself with kindness, not pity. You choose your peace over your performance. You stop explaining your worth and start embodying it. You take up space, not loudly, but fully. You make decisions that serve your soul, even when no one claps for them. You choose people who reflect back your light instead of asking you to dim it. And one day, almost unexpectedly, you'll feel it, the stillness that comes not from being alone, but from being whole. You'll walk into your own presence and feel safe. You'll realize that the love you sought in others was always meant to begin with you. You'll see clearly that reclaiming your value and space wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about remembering who you were before the world told you to forget. And in that remembering, you begin again. Not as a version someone else tried to shape, but as the truest form of yourself, unapologetic, grounded, and free. There comes a point when all the bending, all the overreaching, all the waiting for change wears down to a single moment of truth, the moment you decide you are done. Not out of bitterness, not because you want revenge, not even because you've stopped caring, but because you finally remember who you are. You remember that your soul wasn't made to be stretched thin, trying to earn what should have been freely given. You remember that strength isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's the soft, steady decision to no longer abandon yourself. And it's in that decision that everything shifts. The shift doesn't happen in others first. It happens in you. A quiet resolve begins to form. You stop chasing apologies that never come. You stop twisting your voice to be easier to hear. You stop trying to read silence like scripture, to interpret absence as something you've done wrong. Instead, you lean inward. You hold your own gaze. You speak your own name with reverence again. You begin to walk like someone who knows their worth isn't up for debate. And people notice, not because you make a spectacle of your change, but because energy never lies. They feel the difference. They feel when you're no longer emotionally available for mistreatment, when your boundaries stop being suggestions and start becoming the structure of your self-respect, when you no longer offer explanations to justify your distance, only peace that speaks for itself. The shift that follows your strength is not about punishing others. It's not a performance. It's a rebalancing. The scale of your life begins to even out. Where you once overgave, you now observe. Where you once tolerated, you now transform. And in that transformation, you stop confusing effort with love. You start recognizing who shows up for you without being asked, who respects you without requiring reminders, who sees you without making you perform your pain to be understood. Sometimes the people around you will not be ready for this version of you. They will feel your growth as distance, your silence as attitude, your boundaries as betrayal. But that is not your burden to carry. Growth disrupts dynamics that were dependent on your smallness, and it is not your responsibility to keep shrinking so others stay comfortable. Your strength isn't a weapon, it's a mirror, and not everyone is ready to see themselves in it. But don't shrink again. Don't go back to old versions of yourself just because they were easier to accept. The shift that follows your strength demands that you trust yourself even when you're misunderstood, that you stay grounded even when the world around you tries to pull you back into patterns you've outgrown. It's in this shift that you start noticing beauty in your own solitude. Peace becomes more attractive than attention. Consistency becomes more valuable than charm. You find joy in the small acts of reclaiming, saying no without guilt, resting without shame, choosing stillness over chaos. You realize you don't need to prove your worth to anyone. You simply need to live it. And slowly, as you honor that strength, your life begins to reflect it. New relationships begin to form, ones built on reciprocity, not rescue. You connect with people who respect your time, your truth, your tenderness. You no longer tolerate being half-loved because you now know what it feels like to be fully held by your own spirit. You see clearly what aligns and what exhausts, what nourishes and what depletes. And you choose accordingly, not out of fear, but from a deep reverence for your own wholeness. The shift is permanent when it comes from within, when it's not rooted in someone else's behavior, but in your own awakening. That's when you no longer need closure to move on. You no longer need validation to feel seen. You no longer need to explain to be understood, because you've stopped living for the reaction and started living from your truth. This kind of strength doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand attention. It simply is. It walks into rooms and changes the atmosphere. It sits in silence and radiates assurance. It no longer asks, "Am I enough?" but instead declares, "I am whole." The shift that follows your strength is not just a turning point, it is a homecoming, a return to self, a quiet revolution where you stop settling for less than you give, where you remember that love doesn't require you to suffer and respect doesn't have to be earned through silence, where your heart no longer lives in the waiting room of someone else's realization. It's the moment when you realize you were never too much. You were just offering too much to those not ready to receive. And now, with strength as your compass and self-respect as your guide, you move forward, not with bitterness, but with grace, not with rage, but with freedom. You were never meant to be a background character in someone else's story. You are the author, the narrator, the rising action, and the thunderous finale. When they stop valuing you, don't chase, don't beg, don't fight for space in someone's heart where your worth is on trial. Try this simple thing. Walk away with grace so loud, the silence leaves an echo. Because, darling, once you remember who you are, they will too.